In October 1943, the sound of boots echoed down the corridor while Irina Sendler sat alone inside her cell at Warsaw's Pawjak prison. Days earlier she had been arrested, and the Gestapo was already aware that she was connected to an organization aiding Jews. What came next would leave her carrying injuries for the rest of her life. Across occupied Europe, from Norway's frozen roads to the interrogation chambers of Lyon, thousands of women confronted the calculated cruelty of the secret state police known as the Gestapo. Resistance members, political detainees, and women who dared to shield the persecuted were drawn into a system built not merely to extract information, but to shatter the human spirit entirely. Inside the interrogation rooms of the Gestapo, throughout occupied Europe, the interrogation rooms inside Gestapo headquarters displayed a chilling sameness. At the Klapperfeld police prison in Frankfurt, questioning took place around the clock between 1933 and 1945, carried out by officers such as Bauer, Huber, Ludwig, Datz, and Ruhlmann. These interrogations followed a carefully staged escalation, beginning with insults, threats, and slaps, before advancing to extreme physical violence. Women endured brutal beatings, agonizing restraints, and the violent tearing of hair from their scalps. At Gestapo headquarters in Lyon, 13-year-old Simone Lagrange watched as Klaus Barbie, the chief of operations, entered the room carrying a cat. At first, she took comfort in the animal, believing that someone who showed tenderness toward a cat could not be cruel. Moments later, her hair was twisted around his fist as he struck her again and again. For 7 straight days he returned, wearing what she later described as a smile as thin as a knife's edge, continuing the assaults in an effort to force her to disclose the location of her younger siblings. Psychological manipulation matched the physical abuse, as interrogators shifted deliberately between feigned kindness and sudden brutality to break their prisoners' resistance. Cold water methods, the ice-cold interrogation rooms. Among the most feared tools within Gestapo intimidation facilities was the bathtub. Known in France as la baignoire, this method involved repeated near-drowning in freezing water. Lise Lesevre, a member of the French resistance, endured this torture for 9 days in 1944. Ordered to undress, she was made to step into a tub filled with icy water, her legs bound to a pole above it. Barbie pulled on a chain connected to the pole, forcing her head beneath the surface and holding it there until she believed death was imminent. Each time she emerged choking and gasping, the process began again. She later testified that she tried to swallow the water in hopes of drowning quickly and ending the agony, but her body's instinct to survive made it impossible. In Norway, a pregnant woman named Henriette B. Lorenzen was subjected to similar treatment following her arrest by the Gestapo. A German physician confirmed she was 4 months pregnant before a pillow was placed beneath her abdomen and the interrogation continued. She was later sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she gave birth before being separated from her child. Cold water torture served multiple purposes. It left few visible marks, induced hypothermia and shock, and produced an overwhelming helplessness as victims repeatedly experienced the sensation of drowning without the release of death. Sleep deprivation and isolation as instruments of control. Depriving prisoners of sleep was central to what the Gestapo referred to as intensified interrogation. This method involved keeping detainees awake for days at a time through non-stop questioning, glaring lights, and constant physical discomfort. Women held in solitary confinement across occupied Europe endured interrogations that stretched on for days without rest. The effectiveness of the technique lay in its simplicity. It required no specialized tools and left no physical trace. As exhaustion deepened, prisoners suffered hallucinations, confusion, and the slow collapse of their mental resistance. Isolation magnified every one of these effects. Women were confined to cells measuring only a few square meters, severed from all human contact except for their interrogators. In Gestapo prisons across the occupied territories, isolation combined with sleep deprivation produced conditions where prisoners began to question their own memories and inner strength. Silence itself became a form of torture, interrupted only by the sounds of other detainees being led away for questioning or by the deliberate display of corpses carried past cell doors. Guards intentionally marched broken bodies through the corridors so prisoners could see what awaited them. This psychological warfare was as devastating as any physical violence, leaving women in a constant state of dread, never knowing when the next session would begin. The standing cell without end. The standing cell, pain without a touch. Pain without a touch. One of the most insidious methods of torture employed by the Gestapo was the standing cell, a technique that inflicted unbearable pain while leaving no visible marks. Prisoners were forced to remain upright for hours, sometimes days, inside narrow chambers where sitting or lying down was impossible. In Gestapo facilities throughout Poland and Germany, women were placed in these cells, often with their hands bound above their heads in strained positions. The standing cell exploited the body's natural limits, leading to swelling in the feet and legs, muscle spasms, and ultimately circulatory collapse. In Incuta and other detention centers, prisoners were made to stand on their toes, arms raised just high enough to prevent full rest. This position, sometimes referred to as the pillar, generated escalating agony as hours blurred into days. Guards conducted regular checks to ensure the prisoner remained standing. Those who collapsed were subjected to physical punishment, and the cycle began again. Women held under these conditions described the feeling as fire racing through their limbs, every muscle crying out for relief that never arrived. The psychological toll was just as severe, as prisoners understood that any slip, any momentary weakness or loss of balance, would result in further punishment. The method required no complex equipment, only a confined space and the intentional application of prolonged physical stress, pushing the body beyond endurance. Electric cables, the instrument of silent submission. Electric cables, the means of silent submission. Electric torture became a defining method in many Gestapo facilities during the occupation. Interrogators used telephone magnets, hand-crank generators that delivered electric shocks when attached to the body through wires or electrodes. Women were subjected to electrodes fastened to sensitive areas, producing intense pain while leaving little visible evidence. In interrogation centers across France and the occupied territories, this practice grew increasingly common after 1940. The electric current triggered violent muscle contractions, burns at the points of contact, and a sensation victims described as fire coursing through their bodies. Unlike beatings, which left bruises and wounds, electric torture could be repeated with less risk of obvious injury that might draw unwanted scrutiny. Through electricity, the Gestapo embraced what would later be known as clean torture. Methods engineered to break prisoners while leaving no proof behind, no evidence that could survive to testify against those who inflicted it. And Laguerre, arrested by Barbie in 1944, endured torture so extreme that she lost her sight. She later testified that Barbie and his men behaved as savages, repeatedly assaulting her and causing severe facial injuries, including damage to her mouth. The combination of electric shocks with other techniques formed a comprehensive system of pain designed to annihilate resistance. The women who survived these interrogations carried both physical and psychological scars for decades. Many, like Lise Lesevre, who suffered a spinal injury from a weighted device, lived with permanent damage. Others, including Simone Lag-Grange and Irina Sendler, bore witness to the calculated cruelty of a system that treated human suffering as nothing more than another instrument of state power. In 1987, when Barbie, then 73 years old, at last faced trial in Lyon, the women came back to stand before their tormentor. Their testimony exposed more than isolated moments of cruelty. It uncovered the organized, systematic terror imposed across occupied Europe. The techniques of the Gestapo, crafted to inflict the greatest pain while leaving almost no trace, marked a grim refinement of repression's machinery. As the final survivors of those interrogation chambers slip from living memory, their words endure, ensuring the world remembers not only what occurred behind those walls, but also the resilience required to survive and eventually to speak.